Welcome everyone in a new session in a series of Leadership Challenged. It's a great pleasure to have this important group of people who are experiencing leadership in all various frameworks, communities, layers. So I'm excited to learn about the new views on what's good, what's bad, where is the future of leadership, what can we do in order to be the leaders who are proud to create spaces and communities for future generations as well. So the whole session is part of a series of sessions that dear friend Mar, Andrea, Lev, and myself are conducting throughout the entire year. Our goal is that we then collect the contributions from all our speakers and create a book that will be a testimony of our momentum of the year 2025 and the year 2026, and will show how did we understand the concept of leadership, how did we understand our involvement, and where do we see the future. So I'm excited to read this book in about 20 years' time. So the purpose of the Year of Leadership is to raise the awareness, to challenge the concepts, dare to go beyond, and of course, to imagine and practice. So without further ado, this is an incredible lineup of speakers for today. And this session is organized in collaboration with our sister network, Living Cities Earth. So without further ado, Lev, you are in charge of today's session, and allow me to pass the word back to you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much, Violeta, and everybody is welcome at today's discussion. We will have a live session, so things could go wrong as they do in the real life. So we are not a perfect group of perfect individuals. We are just humans. And Nate, myself, Paddy, Marilyn, Joseph, and a couple of other colleagues who will be joining shortly. They're traveling, so soon they will arrive to their destination and join us. Some of them travel from Africa to Europe, others travel within Europe or Asia. So it's one big global family, and it's so exciting that modern technologies allow us to really connect, not only on the level of mind or visual, but also on the level of heart. And you could say that heart connection is not so modern. We have been connecting on the level of heart for thousands of years. And I invite everybody who participates, think about it and share some stories in the chat as well, right? What is it for you, the leadership? Is it only about heart? Is it only about mind? Is it both of those, or maybe something else, right? So all kinds of leadership experience, communication experience, community building experience, welcome Ferial, that we will be discussing today. Please reflect on it through your personal life, through your sort of insights, learnings, as we learn all together on this one small planet. I choose the background today, which is both sort of reminding me of our springtime in the northern hemisphere, as Paddy and Ferial always remind me that in the southern hemisphere it's not spring, it's sort of a little bit different season. And that's another sign of our global, community, which brought us today here. But when we spoke with Violeta a few months ago, really, she asked me, Lev, is there anything you and your colleagues you would like to contribute to this Year of Leadership Challenged? And we thought about it, and we felt that, yes, we want to contribute our stories, our real-life experiences, our understanding that none of us is perfect as we are, but we're in a continuous sort of journey to sort of evolutionary journey on an individual, but also as a collective of people, organizations, which really span around the globe. And we will have a very lively sort of discussion today. I will not be talking for 2 hours, so sorry to take a few more minutes right now as we set up the stage. But really, it will be a collection of stories, personal experiences, professional sort of insights, and what we call integral development wisdom on the level of people, places, and also our planet, as we learn to be the planet citizens. And I wanted to introduce, before everybody else, our surprise guest. So Paddy Pampalis was very kind to join us. And yesterday we had a work session with Nate and Paddy, and we were discussing really the topic of integral leadership and how to share some of those tools with people from around the globe. And when I looked at Paddy, I realized, well, Paddy should be part of our discussion today, so she kindly agreed and put some of her other, priorities aside. So Paddy, instead of going through the usual round of introducing all the speakers, let me ask you a first question, and then we'll go, of course, around the room with all of our topics today, and ask you, how do you feel being the last kid on the block today? What's your inner state? Could you share it a little bit? And why the topic of leadership and communities is important to you personally?
Thank you, Liv. Sure, it's quite a big question.
And you have 1 or 2 minutes to answer it.
I know. The last kid on the block, not unusual for us from the South to be the last kid on the block. So, and I'm loving that kind of invitation. I see myself as a bridge. I'm obviously really steeped in the African soil, and my home is here, and I'm a couple of generations of living here, and yet I have European roots as well, and I've traveled the world. And understanding or working with human relationships and understanding how we can actually get on better without the divides, these massive divides that split us, is probably a purpose of mine.
It's so interesting when we work with Paddy. I'm still learning because every time she creates this pause in the end of her speeches, and I'm thinking, okay, is it time to reflect and go deep into myself, or should I check whether Paddy has completed her sharing, etc. So we're all so different, right? The communication styles, our personal histories, and yet we're here to communicate, collaborate, and co-create our future. And we'll be talking about today not only in terms of the abstract leadership, right, how it should be, but also how we all came to the point of even thinking about it, the leadership communities, and participating in different communities, cities, and regional sort of developments around the world. So Paddy, welcome again. I really would like to invite everyone who is listening today or watching the recording to reflect, how do you feel, right? Not only when you're in a position of power and authority, but also when you're in a slightly underprivileged or maybe a marginal position in a group of people in your community, in the world, right? And how we can go not into the victim mentality, but also take the healthy power, and Nate might be talking about healthy power relationship later on, and really become the creator of the future from wherever we are in our community, wherever we are in our family, wherever we are in the world. And the world is changing fast, and I would like to ask Marilyn Hamilton, Marilyn, with your global experience and working with communities, organizations all over the world, how do you feel in the world today? Question number one. And number two, if you talk to your inner child, right, this innocent sort of voice within our, consciousness, how would your inner child reflect on the topic of today's discussion, leadership and communities?
Thank you, Lev, and thanks, Paddy, for opening up. I never think of you as the last kid on the block, so it's interesting to think that is really kind of an expression from childhood that you're asking me to reflect on. And I think since I had an unusual upbringing in Canada, my father was in the museum field. And as he moved through his career, I said that I either slept in or visited most museums in Canada. Slept in because oftentimes when we were visiting a museum of interest to his work, there wasn't anywhere else for the family to stay. We'd stay in the museum, and I'd look up on the floor and see, all the artifacts from around the area or around the world that really sort of I came to know when I left home when I was older, that this was an unusual upbringing, you know, that the world tended to turn up not only in the museums, but at the dinner table. And they were just people who would come and be in our home, and I would know them as people and later learn, oh, they're very famous authors or archaeologists or historians or geologists. And I came to know, oh, the world can be known through many different lenses, through many different cultures. I spent some of my childhood not only in cities, but also on farms all across Canada and in many Indigenous places as well. As the historian and my father was including not just the influence of the Eurasians that had come into Canada, but also the Indigenous peoples who were there before all of us. So today, I think if I fast forward, I just came back from 5 weeks in Canada. I actually live in the eco-village Findhorn in Scotland. So I'm on the 59th parallel today, and I've zoomed up here from the 49th parallel, which is sort of the dividing line between Canada and the United States, the border. And of course, borders these days are something that leaders are having to consider. Not just as the usual boundaries in our lives, but, you know, the borders that we put around cities, around regions, around nations. And I really think that's interesting when we look at some of the backgrounds that we've chosen, that the real significant boundaries, I think, that we really need to take into consideration as leaders are the boundaries with nature. And to know that we're really not separated from them. We are in nature, we are as nature. And I think that's something that challenges us to reframe who we might think of ourselves as leaders. It's not just amongst humans, but amongst non-humans as well. And that my calling is to really always try to think through Gaian perspectives. And as you said, Lev, to bring leadership to the planet and all of our places and all of our peoples and us as individuals, as persons. Maybe one last thing I can reflect on from leadership was I really always loved Joseph Jaworski's definition of leadership as a journey to wholeness for an individual. And when I was studying leadership and learning in self-organizing online community systems, I had to have a definition for community. And I chose to say that community is a journey to wholeness for a group of people. So I think leaders these days have to understand that it may not be just a singular group. We're not in groups that are all from the same culture, are structured the same. And so I think this calling to wholeness, calling to think on a Gaian scale is something that challenges leaders today, certainly challenges me.
Wow. Now I want to make a pause like Paddy does and really deeply reflect on not only what you said, but so much more which comes through those simple definitions of leadership being a journey to wholeness and the community being a journey to wholeness for a group of people. And as we came together, really all the outstanding individuals who joined our panel and also all the participants, I think we could relate to the experience in our lives when we're going through the expansion, right? As they say, the circle of care. Most people, we start with ourselves. We sort of learn to take care of ourselves as a child, as a young person, and eventually, step by step, our circle of care grows. And Marilyn has this beautiful concept, I think, 4 circles or 4 levels of care, caring about ourselves, caring about those around us, sort of our family, community, then caring about the place where we live, a city, a village, eco-region, and eventually coming all together to take care about the planet, which offers us all of those wonderful opportunities for evolution. Welcome, Pavel. We're in the middle of our discussion, so we'll come to you in a few minutes. And Marilyn, thank you again for your contribution, not only today, but throughout your life, because with all the insights from your books, which really inspire thousands of people all over the globe, we're very privileged to have you with us on this journey today. Thank you very much. And immediately I see another person from the same forest with the same background, at least, and Ferial has just landed in the north of Europe, just came from the south of Africa. So, Ferial, thank you again for agreeing to join our sort of gathering, a planetary gathering of individuals and people who study and practice leadership. I know that you had quite a few challenges, as everyone has in our lives, throughout the years of growing in South Africa, moving to another place on our planet. So if you share perhaps in a couple of minutes, what was your path to leadership? Because definitely today you're one of those, bright leaders who create communities around some ideas and some action. So, but what was your path? Did you have any challenges, or it was an easy sort of road to glory, so to say?
Wow, I don't know about glory, Lev. I think leading anything is really, it requires an immense amount of humility, I would say, because it also, I mean, my friends, some of them here, teaching me, it's not about being right or about thinking that you have an answer. Or, I mean, my dear friend Lev, Nate over there is always reminding me, it's basically starting from, I don't know, right? And so you talk about a pathway here. So yes, of course, I think we probably all have those stories. And I do think that leadership and coming to that space of leadership is that deep humility. And I see my pathway here as probably having forged that within me. Because if you acquire something very easily, I think it makes you not appreciate it, I want to say, in the same ways. And I think being back home in South Africa this last few weeks have really, again, it's a place always of grounding for me, and a remembering, I can get emotional about it, a remembering of the path here, because yes, it was not an easy one. But I think it has made me a better human as a result of that. So Lev, just something came to mind that I'd forgotten years ago. I didn't even think about it, because when you're in a whole new setting, you kind of, take on the environment, I think, that you're around. And just being back home and going, driving past the townships where I had lived and where I had grown up. And then I remember sitting in Paddy's, on Paddy's patio, and there was another gentleman, David, and the two of us started talking about our backgrounds, and some of these things came back to me. I remembered living in a little room, tiny little room with my mom and my two siblings. It was for a short period of time because my parents had gone through divorce, but then remembering that even though I was there, I didn't even understand that it was hard being in this tiny little room with my mom and two siblings, but that was actually, my mom created this La Vita Bella, where it was this adventure, and I didn't know it was hard, and it was in the midst of what today would probably be one of the roughest townships that you would find, not only in South Africa, but in the world. Like you literally don't want to drive through there, and today I'm afraid to even go, into that space. And realizing that there was a time in my life where I needed to get up at 4 or 5 in the morning. So my mom would get us onto a bus, take an hour from there, get to another stop. And this place, I mean, if any of you ever get there, it's called Hanover Park. Nobody ever wants to go there. Major gangsters. Paddy would probably attest to a little bit more of that. And these 3 little children, 2 brothers and sisters I took care of, and I was only maybe 8 or 10 years old, something like this. And then changing over there and getting to another bus for another hour, and then reaching my destination and having to walk another half an hour to school, and having to do that in the morning, in the afternoon, having to come home, take care of my brothers and sisters. And they were all A students as well as I. Nobody ever helped us with homework. Nobody, and we had a wonderful mom who was an absolute hero to me, but she had to work and make sure that we had food on the table. And realizing all of that, like, I don't think about that anymore, and realizing that journey, that yes. And then I could go on and on with so many other things. But really, that's the ground from which I come. And I think when you reach a space now of, wow, I get to do what I do in the world, then you cannot but be humble. Because it certainly wasn't something that I would say I earned. I would say it is grace. And it is just that response to life. And for me, I would say that is leadership, as in responding to what life is asking of you. And there's a word that, as I've been studying the word leadership and asking myself, what is this, And there's this word, the root word for leadership, kind of grounded in death. And I was like, oh, that's a little bit morbid. So it's not the morbidness of the death, but the willingness to lay down your life so others may have a path to walk on. And I think for me, that's it, Lev.
Wow, you brought so many important things. Sometimes one word speaks a whole, story. And you mentioned that sometimes leadership starts from I don't know, from the place of not knowing. And it's not very often that you go to a business school or to a government sort of service institution and they teach you how to not know, right? Most often, if you go to an institution like Harvard, government school of government, or European, whatever, HSC or other sort of universities and schools, they teach you how to know, right, and how to tell people how to do things. And I think this is where the whole subject of really redefining leadership came about. But when you said I don't know, I remembered my own story. I will not talk in detail about it because I want to engage Joseph with all of his life experiences, but just a quick mention. We represent a sort of a global integral initiative called the Living Cities Earth. Marilyn, Nate, Paddy, Joseph, Ferial, Pavel, Violeta, and other colleagues. So we work on this sort of vision of 10,000 living cities on one living planet. But I never thought about cities until maybe 12, 13, 14 years ago. I lived in some of the most remarkable cities in the world, but I never thought about cities, right, as a object of my consideration. I had my own life, I had my friends, etc., until one day a mayor of one particular city came to me just through some personal connections and said, Lev, I want to develop this city, but I don't know how to do it. And this simple expression, we realized it all later. Then we created a group of, citizens from, business, different walks of life, non-profit organizations, etc. We created this association for city development and had some amazing, insights and achievements, etc. But only later we realized that it all started from him saying those few words. I don't know how to do it. And it was such a remarkable experience which sparkled the whole sort of movement. So, Ferial, thank you for bringing the I don't know perspective into our conversation. And yet, let me move to Joseph, who, from my perspective at least, knows a few things. Because not only Joseph is a remarkable human being, but also he is a person who trained thousands and thousands and thousands of local leaders to take care of their communities. So, Joseph, I will kindly ask you to please take not 1 or 2 minutes, but 2 or 3 minutes, or even 3 to 4 minutes, and quickly share for those people who are not aware of those remarkable experiences you and your colleagues had throughout last 30 years of your life, and what was achieved and what allowed you and other people to really create this tremendous impact in India and in other countries. Please, Joseph, thank you.
Thank you, Lev. Actually, to share with you all, my young age was not very significant. It was actually insignificant. I was a normal child, but I was always disturbed with things happening around. It's always disturbed. I used to ask, why this way? Why not the other way? And people started calling me, you are a cranky fellow. You stop talking too much. Don't ask questions, that way. But still, it kept on disturbing me a lot. And whenever things go out of hand, or when it is very not comfortable to me, immediately I step in. I don't see what is ahead or whom I am going to face. And of course, most of the time it put me into trouble. But at the same time, I learned a lot. And slowly I discovered there is something very, very important quality, which is people call a leadership quality in me. Then I said, then I have to work on it further. And that's how I had to start a political party for myself. And finally, within a very short time of starting a political party, I realized I'm in the wrong track, because party politics, as taught by common man, is not the right approach, because it all centers on the party ideologies. And when this started disturbing me, then I started reading a lot of people, and one very impressive saying which inspired my life, or even which changed my life, was from Dr. Ambedkar. And when reporters asked him, why don't you start a political party? Because you have such a mass following in India. He says, even if a saint comes down from heaven and starts a political party to change the system, he cannot change the system. He will be part of the system. And that was very true. And that inspired me. Then I said, I had to stop my party politics. Then I had to research. I had to do a lot of studies. What else? And during the studies, I realized every individual, whoever he is or she is, a leader in his own way and in his own strength. And the difference is, some realize it later, some realize it at the younger age, some don't even realize. But what made me realize this, if not I, who else? It keeps on ringing in my ears even today. If not I, who else? So I keep on telling people, if not you, who else? And that's what made me an expert in teaching about leadership. And people love to listen to me because I keep on asking them questions. I don't give any answers to them. So finally, what I found, every individual all over the world, whatever may be, irrespective of their culture or their background of the nation, that or whatever it is, every individual is a leader. And we have to create a platform for every individual so that the individual participates in exercising and learning and experiencing his or her leadership, and share it for everyone's common good. So that's how I go about it. And otherwise, there is nothing very, very impressive about my learning process. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. Well, I realize that I'm a very bad host because I don't introduce our panel speakers. Well, we had some bias, of course, in the introduction, but let me quickly mention that Joseph, such a humble man, as Ferial mentioned, we are sort of, except for me, everybody else is very humble today. And Joseph is really a rock star, or, you could say a community star, because Joseph and his colleagues, right, from neo-bureaucracy, and maybe Nate will talk about it, how this movement and this, approach came to Europe, because Nate was one of the people, and I'll pass it to Nate in a minute. But Joseph and his colleagues inspired, as I learned before, but also thank you for reminding that you were going through your exploration path, right? And you had another person who inspired you with his vision and ideas, and it gave you so much energy that you've been able to share it with tens of thousands of people and communities across India and other countries. So the movement of neo-bureaucracy, and I'll also ask Nate to quickly comment on how he learned about it and how it all moved into the Sonic, methodology and movement in Europe. But Joseph, thank you very much for how you highlighted how we all could be a leader, right, in our own right, in our own circumstances, and in our own way. We don't all need to be, the leader who goes up front. Some of us sit behind and support people to move forward, right? And there are so many different leadership styles today. So thank you again. And if we could go to the United Kingdom, and when I met Nate maybe a couple of years ago, I always thought, what a beautiful British accent. And then I learned that Nate came from the United States and now living in the United Kingdom. So Nate, could you first talk a little bit about Joseph and neurobureaucracy and how you learned about this movement, and then, of course, how it connected to your personal journey in life, and what do you see sort of as one or two key lessons about leadership and communities you picked up along the way? Thank you.
Wow, that's a lot. I mean, first off, no British person would compliment me on my British accent. So it always makes me laugh when you say that. But yeah, so Sonic, the sociocratic neighborhood circles model, which is now rolling out in cities such as Augsburg and Vienna. And my apologies to all of the Dutch people who are listening to this. Utrechtse Heuvelrug. I say it wrong every time. I'm assured by my Dutch friends, but there it is. And you know, places in Greece. And anyway, the point being, Sonic, the sociocratic neighborhood circles model, is a translation of what has worked well in southern India into forms of organizing that have already been proven in Europe and North America. And the thing you have to understand, so this is why we needed to do a translation. Local culture influences how we organize and how we lead. You know, Joseph tells me over and over again, well, to get started, just say, you know, hey, I want to talk to you. And in southern India, that works very well. In southern England, not so well. You need to find excuses here in southern England. You know, you need to, you know, just knocking on the door and saying, could we have a cup of tea, is not as effective here. Here we need to organize a street party or find other excuses to make connections. So the neighborhood parliaments movement that first was developed by Father Edwin Maria John when he was a young priest in southern India in the 1970s, and then transformed through several iterations, including the Kundumbashri movement in Kerala. So Father Edwin started this in Tamil Nadu. As a Catholic priest, the communists were sufficiently impressed, the communist organizers in Kerala were sufficiently impressed that they asked for his help and developed an amazing secular form of this in Kerala that's sometimes referred to as a Keralan economic miracle. And then Joseph got involved in the 1990s and became sort of the lead trainer for that movement. And they started calling these things neighborhood parliaments. They started working with children and launching children's parliaments, youth parliaments. And in 2010, my mentor, John Bulc, was teaching sociocracy in India. So sociocracy is a consent-based way of organizing that works well in large industrial companies, small charities. You can use it in your family. You can even use it as a coaching method for yourself. But the key thing is that it's a form of self-organizing and self-management that is effective for human organizations of any size. And when he was teaching this in India, he ran into Father Edwin, and Father Edwin said, wow, it sounds like we have similar vision, similar practices. And then at that point, Father Edwin and Joseph started teaching sociocracy as part of their neighborocracy core model. That was when I got to meet the two of them. And in recent years, so I should say, this movement, although the different communities that are using neighborocracy use it differently. You know, there's been decades of training people to do these things and decades of people finding their own ways to do them. So when we talk about the neighborocracy movement, we're not talking about every community doing it the same way. even all of the ones trained by Joseph are, finding their own ways to do it. But there is a standard model, and that standard model is built on the, now hundreds of thousands of communities that have taken on these ways of organizing. So it's built, if you think about how many human hours of learning that amounts to, with maybe 100 people per community, hundreds of thousands of communities means tens of millions of people involved. And we're talking about then hundreds of millions of person years of learning that have gone into the current version of the neighborhood parliaments model. So that's what we were trying to translate. And we found that some of the things that worked really well in that model lined up with things that work really well in North America and Europe. So things like local cooperative economies, the sort of thing that you see in the Mondragon Initiative. Things like co-housing developments where you have self-governing local communities. Things like the collective impact networks that involve a wide range of different unrelated actors in working towards a shared vision of local thriving. So the Sonic model brings together the sociocratic governance, this history of practice in Southern India, and also Elinor Ostrom's principles for governance of the commons into a model that anybody can adopt today. And I'll say that my experience of working with Joseph has been challenging, not because Joseph is a difficult person to work with, but because Joseph has asked me over and over again to start by engaging with my neighbors from my heart. And I find that very difficult. It's much easier for me to engage with people from my head. And, so often when I'm speaking, that's where I'm coming from. But when I invited Joseph to the UK and went around visiting different communities with him, over and over again, I saw him successfully engaging people from this really heartfelt curiosity in ways that were transformative and inspired people to get engaged. So if you asked me to add a tiny bit of my own journey, and that's the bit that I want to mention, that value of really coming not only from our heads, but also from, of course, our bellies and our hands, but our hearts.
Wow. It's amazing. It looks like we're just sitting around, a table or around the fire and sharing some really small stories. But when you listen deeply, there is so much in some of those points that Paddy and Marilyn and Joseph and Ferial and Nate and Violeta in the beginning, and myself even, we have shared that each one of those points are different modes of engagement with different people, different cultural sort of backgrounds and circumstances. Each one deserves a special discussion, right? And as I look at the next sort of speaker of our small panel today, Pavel, Luksha, Pavel, it looks like you and me were in the same forest, just seen from different perspectives, right? Mine is sort of circular, yours is a little bit more linear. I also see that Joseph and Nate, they seem to be in the same house, more or less, maybe across different continents, but there is still similarities. Marilyn and Ferial, and Paddy is in the universe of her own, and of course Violeta is the meta person who brought us all together today. But Pavel, thank you again for joining after your travel. It was really important to have your voice, not only as your individual voice, which is important, but you are part of so many different leadership networks, entrepreneurial sort of clubs and social entrepreneurship initiatives, and many other really groups and communities of people who not only individually bring different types of leaders together, but also collectively, like the Weaving Lab and the Ashoka and University for the Earth and other initiatives. For me, they are the collective leaders, sort of collective leadership entities, right? And since you have been studying the future of humanity, and really recently, last year, wrote a book about it, about the next 100 years, could you quickly share your perspective, not only where the leadership came from? When I look at Nate, I think about the religious leaders of the past, right? The Jesus Christ and other sort of historical, let's say, figures. But also, who are the leaders of the future? And in the world of growing complexity, right, and all those meta crises, etc., from your research, could you share a little bit how could we expect to see leadership evolve in the next 100 years, if you could bring this perspective? Thank you.
Thank you, Lev. Very inspiring and ambitious question to explore. So first of all, I think you already point to part of an answer. So part of an answer is that I think we are moving away from the idea that dominated leadership role model as an individual leading everyone, like in front of the crowd, telling other people what needs to be done or showing them the direction, like this military leader riding on a white horse in front of his troops. That image sort of dominated our leadership narratives for, I think, millennia. And of course, prophets and other important religious figures of the past. So there was this element of individuality, kind of standing out of the crowd. The idea that crowd is like a flock of sheep that need to be shepherded into something. So the difference between leaders and common people. I think all of those narratives have been dominating our mindsets around leadership for far too long. But what we come to discover now is that several things. So one of them is that even in the present societies, despite all the massive inequalities that exist, and of course, I don't claim that every society has equal access to opportunities. It doesn't. But nevertheless, I think we are living in the situation where more people than ever are empowered to lead. So that idea that leadership is something privileged, that you need to stand out, for me, that dissolves. And we discovered that potentially anyone can find themselves in some kind of leadership position. But that goes to the next issue, that successful endeavors, whether it's movements or whether it's other change processes, they never are led by a single person. No single person is able to comprehend the complexity of what's going on in the world. Not even a single smart group of people. We can discuss what's going on in the world, for example, in the US right now. But I don't have a doubt that many of people that now lead the US administration are very smart people, intellectually. And they have a lot of intellectual capability behind them, including artificial intelligence. That doesn't preclude them from making really sometimes very stupid decisions. And very biased decisions. So the antidote to that bias, those biases, is actually making sure that we are able to be more inclusive in our leadership. We are able to explore. We are able to connect. So leadership increasingly becomes distributed. Then what we discover is that when we move to that distributed leadership, the next role that emerges, and I think everyone on this panel in some capacity does it, is what we can call ecosystemic leadership, or leading from behind. That you are not just telling people what needs to be done. You're not even try to do that. You create conditions for people to lead. So you empower others to lead. So you instead of telling them what needs to be done. And I think that's part of the future. But if we move to the future where future is ecosystemic, when the ecosystems, on one hand, it's in the modern society, it means these networks and different players working together, but the word comes from biology. And it's no random, I think, that we all have forest behind us. I changed my picture to this planetary perspective because I think it's also super important to remind us that we all are part of this beautiful planet. And in my personal story, that was one of my early inspirations. The recognition that comes from Russian cosmologists, but also many other people, about the idea that we are evolving to become a space species. But what people recognize right now, we cannot become just single space species standing out of the rest of the biosphere. We are much more dependent on the biosphere. The biosphere is dependent on us. So if we truly become a space species, it's the biosphere herself that becomes the space biosphere in a way. And leadership for me in the evolution that we are heading to in the next 100 years means moving to the dream of John Macy, the idea of council of all beings in practice, not just as a metaphorical idea, not just as an exercise that ecologically oriented groups do to understand what is the voice of river or what is the voice of forest, but truly find ways to include those voices in real time. And I think that's one of possible pathways of why Gaia wants, through hands of engineers and technologies, to develop AI in the world right now. I think one of potentials is that AI will help create a more harmonious ways of organizing biosphere. I'm not saying organized by humans, organized by biosphere herself, by Gaia herself, with our hands supporting this. So I think the future of leadership moves from individual to distributed to absolutely inclusive to modern human leadership to the ability to listen more to entities that are far smarter and greater than us, such as nature and the planet. So that's to me the future.
Wow. Pavel, thank you. Thank you for bringing all those perspectives. And I never thought about AI in my considerations of the leadership, but truly it will be affecting more and more the way not only we communicate, but also how we see the world, right? What information we receive. And very soon, even people on the screen might not be the real Paddy or real sort of, Marilyn or Nate, but their avatars, which will look exactly the same, which will talk based on their, years of wisdom, etc. And we do have fears, of course, in the society on a personal level sometimes about where it's all going, right? Will it be manageable? Will it go out of control? Those of us who read, science fiction books in earlier years, right? Ray Bradbury, etc. Will we have a dominance of robots, but now AI? Those are questions we not often talk about in our daily sort of community lives when we talk about the city development, etc. Although more and more those topics also become part of the narrative, right? But thank you, Pavel, for bringing those perspectives. I personally didn't think about them for today's discussion, but they are very, very important. And you also spoke about our interconnectedness with the biosphere, right? The nature. Marilyn spoke about it, and the Paddy coming from number one, a place of tremendous beauty, but also of some challenges, and as Ferial mentioned as well. Paddy, could I quickly also go back to you? And I used you a little bit to challenge our perception of who we are, right? Are we a sort of coherent group of smart individuals, or are we all different and some of us are more privileged than others? Or maybe some of us have more talents than others. Of course, eventually we will come to understanding that each person has this tremendous capacity, although we are all different, and our paths in life and our leadership capacity might also differ and suit different circumstances. But going back to your experience, could you please share two things? Number one, anything you would like to contribute as an individual, but second, also try to be the voice of the planet, since we have it now in our backgrounds as well, and really talk about how do you see the planet, the Earth, the Gaia, the living sort of organism of our planet, how the topic of leadership and communities is perceived by this larger sort of living entity, as far as you could relate to it, of course. Paddy, thank you.
Yeah, I'm listening very carefully and inspired by what is being spoken about and what is being done. And I think if we're talking about leadership, I think it is a cosmic mission. And it's a cosmic mission not only for us to keep moving out into the systems, which is so important, but to move within into the system that is in us and the cosmos that is inside of us. And while I read somewhere that in Harvard, they've just done captured a picture of a slice of the brain, which I can't remember the millimeters of intense communications and connections within this tiny slice of 1 millimeter of the brain and what that is holding. So my journey in living in this beautiful and complex environment is about meeting that environment every day at the stop streets, at the traffic lights of our cities, where I, faced continuously with, I look out and I see a forest, and then I'm hearing the cars implode and noise disturb, and the life of the nature has lessened around my little ecosystem that I nurture hugely with butterflies and bees and squirrels. And I look at just on our borders where the, I don't know, some of the very worst of deprivation happens, and that's not far. That's within a kilometer or less of my house, where my assistant is kept awake at night with gunshots, where the streets are barren, and holding that polarity for any leader is an absolute challenge. The temptation is that we always go out and bigger and scale and work in. So my work has been to go in and sometimes stabilize and help thousands of people that we've helped. I've come through learning when I was 16. Those of you who've heard, I started a human relations club at school to try and help. I couldn't understand why we couldn't communicate, why we couldn't have the conversations with each other and see the heart, Joseph, as you and Nate has mentioned. That heart, that heart print, that soul print, that print of humanity or humaneness that lives inside of us. How is it so difficult to be oppositional to that or to be disconnected from that? So I went into learning and education and consulting in that, and I kept wanting to go deeper and deeper, and went into therapy and have worked with babies to organizational systems. So that whole developmental maelstrom of watching a baby and mother connect with each other, as well as working with individuals and couples and family systems. I've created centers for family assessment and therapy. And there is something about the word healing. So while there are many people that are so intent and so purposely and needfully, and that's why I love this community, because I see that together we can actually create those conversations between, and I'm not saying any of us are not exterior focused into the systems and processes when I say the interior, but this humaning has not yet been done well. Humaning together is a next stage. This humaning ourselves has been so disrupted and so torn apart in the very stages of mirroring. And Marilyn, I think of your, we are Gaia's mirrors, or Gaia is a mirror of us. That is the same that needs to happen in the baby and the mother, or the caretaker. Now, if that humaning is not rocking, as it doesn't feel the lullaby, then it is disturbed as it steps into becoming disorientated and disconnected with the city, or disconnected with its community. And without the community, the individual is left without a place where he can or she can contribute. And the community is a grounding place where people come and share their gifts and receive them from others. That's a quote from Sabantu Somal. But in that, I was challenged with trying to do the work in a therapy room or a classroom, or going to looking at leadership in a boardroom, or the executives around the table, or municipalities, and even with government setups, with universities, with integrating in our change from apartheid, which was a massive story on its own, into a democracy. How do people come to integrate? So my work has been about integration, first within the self, then between each other through conversation, and integral you, or integral Ubuntu, or integral womb, which is the big womb or the big container, is how do we create these micro places for the container for people to do the bigger work? So the leadership development and the work that we do through training, coaching is a conversation. We call ourselves a coaching center, but actually it should be the conversational center. Because without conversation, there is no relationship, because conversation is the way we communicate. So I've been at the feet of Krida Mutwa, of Baba Mandaba. I've learned with our own indigenous people. And I am, Nate, as you say, quite mental as well. I've got to keep remembering my heart. And that's the work of leadership. That how do we disassemble ourselves in the humility to move from these thinking models, which are beautiful. I use them. And Lev, you said yesterday, to mention integral becomes such a heady kind of complex thing. Well, it is complex, and it's intimately intimate. It is so, can we look in the mirror of ourselves? And once we can look in the mirror of ourselves and actually see and accept our reflection, and it's the accepting, and then be able to have that reflective capacity to look inwards and outwards, can we move systems in greater ways? So my contribution for leadership is to help individuals and groups to work within their systems, to do what some of these beautiful things that you're saying are occupying.
Wow. It's amazing. We have 2 hours of such intense conversation. Although we don't have the fire in between us, but we have the fire in our hearts, right? And at the core of our planet, I heard there is some fire as well, and on the sun. And it's interesting that first, Pavel has changed his background from the forest to, our planet, and then Lev, or maybe Marilyn did it first, and going over from Paddy. Paddy, thank you so much for your beautiful, beautiful contribution. Going on to northern Scotland, where Marilyn resides these days and co-creates with other members of the, Finhorn community. Marilyn, I see those 4 red hearts behind you. Could you tell us a little bit what they signify, and also any observations which came through your mind stream as you were listening to other participants of our small conversation today?
Thank you, love. So behind you, you just see a way of depicting what you were referring to when I call the 4 cares: caring for self, caring for others, caring for places, and caring for planet. So I call that, ways of expanding the circle of compassion. So as Paddy referred to, learning to be compassionate for self, to actually care for self, so one can care for others. So together we can care for our places and altogether the planet. When I speak with people, so a couple of weeks ago, I was back in Canada, back to Royal Roads University, where I taught many years. I'm still on the faculty there, and I had in front of me a class of global leadership. That's Wanda Krause, Dr. Wanda Krause, who's also Living Cities Earth co-founder, teaches his class. And so I went around and asked each person, their name and then what city they were from. And so kind of like you were referring to earlier today about the group gathered on the screen here in front of me, I had 22 people from 22 cities from around the world. And how do we reflect one another is really a question I always am interested in, because I think the basic questions that we can be curious about are quite universal. And so going to what Paddy was saying, I was taught that that was James Lovelock who was responsible for saying that Gaia is a living organism, when challenged that humans are not very good to Gaia or should not be considered well with Gaia. He said, on the contrary, humans are Gaia's reflective organs. So I was really kind of happy to hear Pavel say that artificial intelligence isn't really artificial. I call it amplified intelligence. And it really is a form of Gaia evolving through us, the consciousness, that inner life of hers. She is not just the outside, the objective world of systems and behaviors that we see, but also has an inner life. And it could be considered energetically, not just through some of the things that we might notice here in the eco-village and have, the openness to talk about ley lines. And ley lines are usually the energy patterns that you actually find in the land. But if you talk to the shamanics, there's many other layers below that, right to the center of the earth. And when you start to weave in the whole idea of not only nature, but the mycelia of nature, the fungi, the ways of connecting through spores that we've often, ignored as humans. But our science has now brought that to our attention, and many people who are energetically sensitive have been able to say, oh yes, well, I just didn't have the words to describe it before. I could only speak of it perhaps in spiritual terms. And so I feel that one of the ways that we and the world reflect one another is that we're able to, I think it was Nate who said, be keynote listeners, not just speakers, but listeners. And as we listen to one another, the stories that we have to share, I think, are deep and profound. And as storytellers, we need to be story listeners and story sharers. And so I feel like the stories these days are so important, especially since what we've come to depend on as media and then social media. Really, it's, as Paddy was saying, the inner stories that we tell ourselves. In the eco-village, I've lived here 8 years now, and I have accustomed myself to what I would say is generally positive talk, including probably a foundation of positive self-talk. It's not that we're a utopia. It's just that the ways that we connect and relate to one another have a way of reflecting something quite positive. I was quite shocked when I went back to Canada, which I hadn't visited for 6 years, and got blitzed by all the media that I choose not to get blitzed by here, but also just people in the street. My brother driving the car, my friends. Wow, I could hear their self-talk, and it was projecting onto other people what they supposed those other people were thinking or saying or doing, or the reasons they were doing. I was actually shocked. And I kind of sort of gently suggested, well, how do you know that about the other person? Have you ever sat down and been curious why they made that choice or why they have that opinion? And I think that's something that I feel maybe the general world is starved of right now. And that's simple curiosity. And I think that that is one of the ways that we can be most profoundly reflective for one another. We don't have to agree with each other, but we can be curious. Well, Paddy, why is it that you think that? Why is it? Where did you get that story from? It's so different than how I understand. So the invitation to have this conversation, the invitation to share stories, I think, is one of the ways that we can create the conditions for each other to share our leadership. Because if we are Gaia's reflective organs, and when I heard that, I actually heard this interview. So I heard James Lovelock actually say that. I didn't just read it. I was so astonished. I drove off the side of the road because I was listening on the car radio. I was so astonished to think, wow, my work actually has something to do with evolution. I have actually been evolved. Oh my goodness. This makes me much more responsible, response-able. And responsibility, I think, is also a core practice and capacity of leaders. So these seem to be such simple practices, but I think they're fundamental. And that when I see how Joseph has amplified those within the community, and I also just say that, you know, one of the ways that I like to, through integral city work, reflect the leadership that we see in the world is at the end of each year, I think of, can we nominate a city of the year or a city system or an ecosystem of the year? And in 2024, we nominated and recognized the neighborocracy and the sonic cluster ecosystem together. So I recognize these initiators of ecosystems that are creating life conditions and leaders in multiple places in the world. I think these simple practices are contagious, and they can be as contagious as simply yourself speaking, you know, positively, or not repeating the negative or the projection that you hear, but simply being curious. And I think when a system is, the inquiry intelligence is practiced in a system, it wakes it up, because the system might never have been asked and just made assumptions. And I think that the waking up is not only the self-awareness, but when we're together to be curious. And the curiosity is, I think, what stirs, maybe perhaps it even stirs beauty, truth, and goodness through the system. And those are some of the ways of doing what I'm really interested in these days, in connecting us back to our souls. That's what I think our leaders are being called in today. Yeah. So those are a few ideas provoked by the previous conversation. Thank you.
Marilyn, it's incredible. It's incredible. I'm listening to each one of us, and every time I want to say, wow, after listening to, you know, Joseph, Paddy, and Nate, and Pavel, and Ferial, and Marilyn. Now you have shared in under what, 3, 4, 5, 6 minutes, really a wealth of knowledge and wisdom, and we can unpack each one of your statements and practice them for years to come. And I remember when you and I worked on some specific city-related projects 10 plus years ago, our team of city, you know, makers, change makers, we were doing a lot of, you know, on-the-ground projects. So it's not only about big ideas and the planet Earth as a big, this beautiful image, but also some daily work on the ground. And when you work on the ground, you experience a lot of inertia, right? So you try to change things, but they don't easily change. You try to help people move from point A to point B, be it in, technologies or management systems or resources or, communication, communities in a city, for example. And the change doesn't happen so quickly, and there are so many challenges. And we came to Marilyn. She was supporting us sort of from behind, giving us this larger systemic and ecosystemic perspective. And we shared with her, Marilyn, there is this challenge and that challenge, and we cannot do this and we cannot do that, and there is not enough resources, but we want to get there, right? And Marilyn told us a couple of very simple sort of words. She said, follow the energy. Don't bump into the walls, right? So where there are too many obstacles, don't try to go through them. Try to see where the natural flow of life energy is going. And we had a large sort of a team of city makers and change makers. And we sat down after our conversation with Marilyn. We reflected a little bit about it. And we felt, wow, there is something about it. So leadership is not only going from point A to point B straight, in a straight line, right? Sometimes you need to relax, not only to get tense and activated, but sometimes as leaders, again, individually and collectively, we need to relax and let it go and observe where life wants to take us. And I'll go to Joseph in a second, but there is this beautiful expression, nature never hurries, but it's never late. Right? The natural flow of life, we never feel that it tries to get somewhere very soon, or otherwise everything will be lost. But at the same time, all the natural processes, they are on time. The seasons, right, the flow of seasons, many other things. And Joseph, with all of the very practical experiences, the topic of our discussion today is leadership and communities. Does the size matter? Does the size matter? You work with people in small communities, right? So we talk about thousands of them, but those are small groups of people. So what have you learned, right? How people, after they step up into those local community role, do they get, let me use this negative expression, do they get stuck on this level, or do they grow through levels of care that Marilyn has mentioned? Just interesting to hear your perspective.
Yeah, thank you. It's a very interesting question, Lev. So I love to answer these questions and share my experiences on this. Does the size matter? Here, the size actually doesn't matter. But what matters is everybody has to be listened to. Everybody has to have enough space to express whatever they want to speak. And everyone has to have a platform where their voices can be heard by everyone. So the size, what we mean in the community, in the local communities, approximately 30 as far as in the Indian context. But when I had the experiences with the European countries or other Western part of the world, we found even 20 is a big crowd, So the size, it doesn't matter that the number doesn't matter, but enough space for everyone to communicate, converse comfortably, and everyone to be heard, and everyone has to be listened to and answered and collaborate. That's what it matters. But here, when I say though this group is a very small group, or say about 20 or 25 or 30, they are connected with every system existing around. And we call it convergence. When we converge with every existing system, and they don't feel that they are alone or they are very small. For example, the existing government system or the city council or county council or municipality, whatever it is, or the different departments of the government or education system, health system, whatever it is, everyone is connected to this small community. Because here, every individual is elected as a minister for various concerns which the community faces. So automatically they get connected with that ministry with the existing government or the city council or other local governing system. So what happens is, though the size is small, the voice is very, very big because it is a collective voice. And when they converge with everyone and when they are connected with everyone and they do the work with the support of everyone, really they do wonderful. And secondly, they are trained from the young age itself, from the children itself, they are trained how to engage with everyone, how to have a positive energy flow, how to have the conversation taking, in the natural way to the positive result and all that. And here I always mention this, artificial intelligence is the operating system of neighborhood parliaments. When I say artificial intelligence, the skill to listen to the voice, the language of the heart of the others and the self. So once every individual learn this capacity, this skill to listen to the voice, to listen to the language of the others, automatically everything falls in line. And ego doesn't have a role there. Acceptance, trying to accommodate everyone, try to respect everyone, and all that it happens. So there is no any space for negative attitude or negative approach, always positive. And we give a lot of trainings, very practical trainings with very interesting exercises where they learn to be part of the whole, that, what is it called? That transforming process. After few months' time, when they are engaged as a children parliament members or youth parliament members or then even for adult neighborhood parliament, without they knowing, they are in the system of the positive energy. They don't blame anyone. If there is something to be done, they don't criticize anyone. They don't blame anyone. They don't point finger saying that this is your duty, you are not done. No, not that way. Always accommodate. We say, yes, we together do it. Perhaps it is a bit late for this thing to be done, but we now come together, we do it. And you can always count on our service. In whichever way I can contribute to the success of this particular work to be done, I will do it. So all these 30 people come forward to do that. And that's why, because of this artificial intelligence success, the operating system success, we could see poverty being eradicated 100% in the communities. Not because of the external forces or external help, but because of the commitment of the community. And any violation of rights being addressed rightly, through whichever means it is. It may be from third party, from outsiders, whatever it is, but that doesn't play, what is that? That doesn't influence the way the community thinks, because they're already set in a particular thinking process, their positive thinking process. So the negative things doesn't play a role here. So here, that's why I said, every person takes the lead. So in the community, when we say 30 people, every person is a minister for some concern or for other. So everyone is responsible. Everyone is accountable. So the leadership automatically evolves. Automatically the leadership evolves through this process. Then at certain point of time, they say, yes, we do it. Yes, we can do it. We do it. So that's how this all evolves. And the real number doesn't matter here and there, depending on the cultural background or this and that may differ. But the idea is that everyone has to have enough comfortable space to speak and express so that everyone is heard. So that is the idea. And through these small communities, a lot of things are achieved. Lots and lots and lots. Even in that 17 SDGs what we have today, And the whole world is frightened to see all these SDGs. No hunger, zero hunger, no, poverty. These all big topics. But whereas when these communities come together, address this system, it is very simply taken care. They just disappear in the communities. And similarly, any issue at the individual level or at the family level or at the local community level or any other higher level can be addressed by these local communities, because they don't function not only as local communities, they are federated at higher level. For example, 20 local neighborhood parliaments will be federated as a village parliament or a county parliament or whatever it is. Then 20, 30 village parliaments will be federated as a block parliament. Then 20, 30 block parliaments will be federated as a district parliament. Then 20, 30 district parliaments will be federated as a state parliament, similarly to the national parliament and global parliament. So this local community talking something in their own local area with a local perspective has a global impact. So that's how everyone learns to be a leader at the global level. He may not have traveled anywhere. He may not have much knowledge about so many other things outside part of the world. But he plays a very active role to be a global leader, influencing the communities at the federated level. So that's how it is. And yeah, thank you.
It's incredible, Joseph, how your story interrelates with what Marilyn has just been sharing, right? And several other speakers today. And this connection between one individual waking up to his or her sort of mission in life and her, strengths and capacity, and how it relates to us waking up to the mission of humanity, right, on a planetary scale. And in a second, I'll go to Ferial. But what you, Joseph, mentioned is that as we integrate or go to the next level of complexity, we don't lose the people on the prior levels, right? We don't disregard them, but we give them more opportunity to manifest, right, their talents and creative capacity. So while the size of our impact and attention might change, right, the volume, the scale, our capacity to contribute in a way doesn't. So we could see ourselves as people within our individual life, our families, our communities, and also as part of the global humanity. And Ferial, because you are a leader of one of those projects that Living Cities Earth launched last year, the Future Leaders project, and many, if not all of us participate in this project. Ecocivilisation is a collective partner of the Future Leaders project, and many of us are speakers there. Ferial, could I quickly ask your perspective? All of us are, I think, above 25 here, maybe even above 26, but there is this growing number of people on planet whom we call teenagers, right, or young people. Children, of course, and Joseph and his colleagues worked with children parliaments for years and decades. But Ferial, from your perspective, now that you will be launching the Future Leaders Initiative on a global scale, how do you see the future of leadership and community through the eyes of the younger part of the humanity? You have your daughters, you talk to other youngsters. Could you share a little bit this perspective, leadership, communities, and teenagers and young people? Thank you.
Thank you, Lev. And so it's been really amazing listening to all of you and just seeing how, if this was a conversation just between myself and you, Lev, how it would be not as rich and filled with so much perspective than what it is having it with all of us. And so again, I think reflecting back on that, I always talk about leaving good ruins. And I think our generation here now, I wonder how we can do that really well. And I say this in particular looking at our young people, because our ways of being are so important because they are looking at this. Now, we might be saying a bunch of things, but I realized from raising my own daughters, it's so much more about what we embody than what we are talking about. And this is so, as I listen to all of you, it's so deep for me because I know that in trying to put together future leaders projects and all the other 150 projects that we're all some involved in, we can easily get carried away with being very busy, very we need to get somewhere, create something, do something. And already our young people are in a world where it's so on this wheel of turning and moving so fast. And again, sitting over here with all of us as we listening to each other, there's a weaving that is happening because we are present and we are listening in. And so for me, I wonder if there's that moment where we take not the responsibility, not the weight, but the response ability, as Marilyn said, to actually be those who are present, who are listening, who are feeling into the field, asking ourselves what is wanting to emerge, as opposed to just creating events, doing things, because something I have learned is just one little domino that you push over very often is the one that will actually create this massive kind of movement, and it would not necessarily have been something you'd have been thinking about over here. But do we give ourselves enough time? And as I said, do we actually, are we an example of this? Of actually giving enough time to sense into, this was something big when I was in South Africa now. And when I was walking in every shopping mall, in every place, I was sensing, and I was sitting there, I was watching and I was looking at those young people. And there would be moments, spirit within me would say, that one, that. And I would walk up to those young people and I would say, you know what? I don't know why I'm speaking to you this moment, but what I'm going to say to you, something prompted in me to tell you that there is something in you that the world needs right this moment. And you were created, and I would leave some of that frequency, and they would most of the time be in tears. It was something that was great because in the UK, I'm often sitting in an office doing all of this planning for all of these projects and things. And in that moment, I was practicing, I want to say, being in the wild, and with my people, and just sensing them, feeling them, loving them. And I don't know, but I'd much rather be there than be in the office doing all of this planning stuff, because I saw individuals being activated in moments I could see they were never going to be the same, because I sensed into it. And I know I was never the same when others did that for me. So I would say, you ask me, what could we do? Sense deeper, listen more to each other, into the field, and ask ourselves, what is this moment wanting from us? Because I think that's what we have to be responsive to, rather than more programs, more things, more faster, better, shinier. And I'm not saying that's not good. I'm not saying that doing those things are not good, but are they the things that life is prompting in that moment?
Thank you, Ferial. It's interesting, several times today, looking at your image on the screen, I remembered the name of one of the organizations which you created, Igniting Life, right?
Yeah.
And now you just mentioned how you came to a person or several people, and in a way brought this sparkle, right, or ignited life and awakening sort of in his or her sort of mind stream and heart. And it's beautiful to have those on the ground connections. Again, today we are talking in this sort of global online setting, but I know that each one of us, and I'll go to Nate in a second, but each one of us has this on the ground experience. When people refer to me as an expert in something, I'm saying, no, I'm not an expert. I'm just a regular citizen. And my path into this, community city development started just as a regular citizen who was really going through the steps of this expanding circles of care, right? From caring about myself, my family, at some point I felt the urge to care about my city. And then we realized you cannot care about the city being alone or in a small group. You need a growing community which fits the level of complexity of your community should be comparable to the level of complexity of issues you are trying to solve. And this is a tremendous journey for many leaders because they could be successful in their organizations or in local governments, but as they tackle a next level of challenges, they need to grow in complexity, what Paddy referred to, in our inner cosmos, right? So our initial level of self-understanding would not be enough as we move on working with higher levels of complexity in the outside world. We need to catch up internally, and then we need to learn how to co-create with other people. And then the issues of communication, listening, connecting, which many of us have mentioned, become very, very truly important. Because without this, we cannot go to the collective consciousness and collective action, which is required to tackle those larger issues on the level of the city, region, or the planet, this meta crisis. So let me quickly go to Nate and then to Pavel. And really listen to all of us. I realize that talking to Joseph or to Paddy or to Marilyn, it would require 2+ hours just for the individual conversation, right? Because there is so much richness in each one of us. And I'm a little bit, I feel I'm a very bad facilitator today because I would love to give to each one of you hours of time because there is so much to share. So I apologize. Anything which doesn't work today is my responsibility. And all the beauty is brought by our beautiful participants. And one of them, Nate, sometimes you and I have some tensions. Could we say so, right? Well, let's say 10% of, or maybe 5% of the time. But it's interesting. I would like to ask you a very specific question. In your life with cities and communities, organizations, how do you support people in their learning trajectories, looking into how we tackle difficult things, right? Not only the beautiful vision, but then, a very sort of awakened and evolved person, Nate Whitestone, meets with a bearded man, Lev Gordon, and we're all well-intentioned and we have the same vision. But then we start to have sparkles and tensions about some very minor things, right? We don't understand each other, some miscommunication. So could you kindly share how do you help people work with difficulties in their, journeys in communities and cities? Thank you very much.
Yeah, I actually want to say a little bit more about those tensions that pop up between us, because I feel like it's actually a really good example. Because here we have two people who share very similar, heartfelt, passionate vision, who want to work with each other and who have, decades of experience in working collaboratively, each of us, right? Like, in fact, people come to each of us for advice on how to work collaboratively, right? But here we are like, you're stepping on my toes. And in my experience, over and over again, this thing of you're stepping on my toes is what turns into escalating conflict. And, when people talk about power struggles, it's as though power is a limited commodity. Like, I have the power, you're going to take the power. And we have this experience because of these sort of primate social ranking things of, who's up and who's down. There's these win-lose encounters that happen from earlier in our lives, the playground, and we see other primates, baboons and chimpanzees, and doing these things. And so it's not surprising that we would see power this way. But a big part of what allows us to shift from toxic ways of being powerful to healthy ways of being powerful together is to see power not as a lose-lose interaction or even a win-lose interaction, but to see power as something that can grow through the interaction that we have with each other. In other words, Lev and I can both become more powerful through our powerful actions. And so I am answering your question, Lev. It's just the key thing is, and I see this over and over again in many different interactions, including these ones, so Lev and I had some misunderstandings about who was going to handle what. We each started doing things that the other person experienced as interference. And so then Lev was like, I'm being less, now I'm going to be less effective. You're taking away my power. And I'm like, no, Lev, you're interfering with me. I'm going to be less effective. And these are things that are heartfelt, passionate, we're not like selfish jerk. Well, maybe a little bit of the time, but mostly we're trying to help. So we care. And so it's like even more obnoxious for somebody to get in our way. And, and I just see this over and over again. And, for Lev and I, what has been so helpful is for him to send me pictures of flowers. No, I mean, he does that. It's actually wonderful. But for us to talk about what feels painful, what feels difficult, to look at like, hey, I think you're getting in my way like this, it's making it harder for me to work, well, hang on. I've been delegated the authority to do these things and it's my baby. What do you mean I'm getting in your way? So we talk it through, we understand each other, we reaffirm our intention of collaborating, and we find a way of supporting one another. So, and then we get healthy power. And that's worked between me and Lev so far. We'll see in the future, but I expect it to work better and better the longer we work together. And I'll just use an example. Last night, I was working with a community group, and I was doing online facilitation, so very similar context to this. And they are in a critical period for their community in doing a co-housing development where they have to sign legal papers and handle financing. And if things don't happen in the right time, in the right order, everything might come apart. So it's a high tension moment for this community. And they like each other, and they really value each other. But there are issues that come up. There are things, somebody identified a risk very, in the last few days of the process. And this was a risk that might take them out of being a participant in the project, which might sink the project. And so you can imagine that tempers were high, that people were pushing on this person, that this person felt like, oh, I'm a victim of a witch hunt. Like, I'm just identifying a risk. Like, I have to speak it out. And so this was the kind of power struggle that I was just talking about was kicking in. Some people were saying, well, you made the agreement, we should just enforce it. And other people were saying, well, that's unacceptable. We need to hear this person. And so what I did was I supported them in getting clear about what the reality was as they all saw it. What are the current agreements? What are the options we have on the table? What are the benefits and risks we see with each of these options? And then we dropped a level deeper and we talked about what are the feelings that are coming up? What are the patterns that you're noticing in yourself and in the community as you're here? And, people talked about fear, people talked about anxiety, people talked about hope and appreciation and the things that they absolutely needed to get done. And I'll tell you, we ran over, first by 5 minutes and then by 10 minutes. And it was we ran over by half an hour before we were able to reach a proposal, because we came back after we went into the feeling space. We were able to come back to the options that were on the table with a little bit less charge, because we had taken some of the fight out of the system, some of the fight or flight, fear response. People were able to hear each other and then to come back to feel a little bit more creative about the possible solutions. And so when I'm working with groups, I try to enable them to go through this kind of learning cycle, where we start off seeing where we are in the known, and then we go a little bit deeper, into sensing the field, making meaning together. People talk about this in Theory U. They talk about it in appreciative inquiry. That every different discipline of effective learning and co-design in groups uses this kind of a cycle, and I use different variations of this when I'm working with people, to support them in hearing each other and getting to a place where they can be creative and find collective intelligence together. And that works when we can find a ground, when we have a common aim, when we can recognize what the commons are that we share, or what the risks are that we share, or what we're trying to create together. In this case, the community had that already, so we could start there. If we don't have that already, then we have to find that common thing that we're stewarding, or thing that we're trying to create. Maybe we care about the welfare of our kids. Maybe we care about the pandemic that's impacting our neighborhood. Maybe we care about the elderly who need to be fed or taken to the, we just need to find some common cause like that before we can do this work. Otherwise, there's not a reason. It could just be recognition that there's a conflict which is harming all of us, as long as we could acknowledge that we're all being harmed. Anyway, I don't.
Wow. It's amazing, Nate. You just took us on a journey so deep into the individual and collective sort of psyche and inner states. And without recognizing those dimensions, and many people, including me, in my prior sort of years, we would have difficulty relating to what's inside of us, right? We see the world outside, we see the problems, we see some opportunities. But what you shared just now is when we gain this capacity for introspection on individual and collective level, we become so much more powerful, and our power could move from sort of some of the toxic ways into the more healthy flow of energy and co-creative capacity. So thank you very much. I personally definitely always learn from you, and all of our attentions are really the fuel for our development. So what a great example. Thank you for sharing. And we have 15 minutes left out of our 2 hours. Violeta, I don't know how you've been able to create this 2-hour format. In the beginning, I thought this is so long, but now I think it's so short. And
that's experience, Lev. It's experience. We were always longer than we anticipated. So we said, okay, 2-hour framework. And then
I love it.
If presentations are over, there's always room for a lot of conversation. So that's lovely. And let me compliment all of you. Thank you for your very deep insight.
We are not done yet, so we still have 15 minutes. But thank you for your appreciation. And really, it goes to all of our speakers and participants today. And as I will move to Pavel in a couple of seconds, I wanted to very quickly reflect on what some of us have shared so far. And really, Paddy brought this inner and outer cosmos, the inner and outer dimensions, right? It's part of the integral approach and many holistic sort of perspectives on how people live. we were creating a letter to mayors of thousands of cities a couple of days ago, and we were thinking we have this event coming up, a series of events we call the Earth Day Summit. Initially, we wanted to have like a week celebrating our planet and also reflecting on all the challenges and opportunities. But then we realized the week is not enough, so we have now 2 months from the Earth Day on April 22nd until the solstice on June 21st, 22nd. So there will be a series of events where we'll continue exploring the leadership, the city development, human development, etc., all those beautiful topics. And as we spoke today, I realized that all the richness, right, which each one and people behind each one of us bring to the discussion today, this richness is power. So sometimes we think about power, authority, and because of unhealthy ways, which Nate also mentioned, we refer to, sometimes people, and I remember myself, I'm 51 now, but when I was maybe 24, 25, I was part of a leadership development program in the Netherlands, in one of those large companies. And we started exploring, so I was a relatively young person at the time, and we started exploring in a group, being in the Belgium Ardennes, sort of the forest area of Belgium. We started exploring this topic of leadership. And I realized that for me, leaders are those loud people, as Pavel referred to, on a horse in front of a group of people. And I had a relatively negative impression because of some of my childhood traumas or other sort of experiences. But over years, I realized that leadership is not so much, the formal authority that sometimes we refer to, right? But it's really our power to create this positive impact in the world in connection with other people, right? And there are so many different styles: learning leadership, authentic leadership. There are many, many of those concepts and ideas. But what I wanted to highlight now before going to Pavel is that leadership is power. And how we use this power, right? How we generate it, how we increase, and how we benefit individually and collectively those whom we care about on different levels of care, right? This is the process, and different tools which we use for leadership, right, could increase our capacity to create this positive impact in the world. So I saw Pavel in so many different circumstances in different countries, in different levels of care on a national, international, sort of local scale. Pavel, and my question to you is, I'm sure that you went through your personal journey over those years. Could you share your perspective? What are the key, let me call it, tools, right, or practices leaders could use today to create this positive change in the complex, ever-changing, uncertain sort of world we are living in?
Yeah. So first of all, Lev, thank you. And reflecting on the question of scale, I agree on one hand to what Joseph said, that scale doesn't matter, but at the same time, I think that it does matter. And I think for groups like ours, it's really important to search for ways to amplify the work we are doing. Because, let's say, people that don't care as much for the planet care for scale. And I feel that in this context, the forces that degrade both our society, but more important, the ultimate conditions for human life and maybe all of biosphere to thrive, are now stronger than forces that work in the positive direction. So yes, scale doesn't matter, but at the same time it does. So let's also see how we can work with ways to amplify our work and learn maybe from those groups that do not care as much, but care for scale. I mean, they discover some interesting things, and maybe they also can expand their perspective. So I think the most crucial thing is something that Nathan emphasized. It's the ability to organize dialogue. It's actually the capacity for for inclusive conversation, for holistic conversation. I think I would, if I were to nominate a single capacity that leaders require on any scale of action, it's that one. Because I think that's the essence of what leadership is in a way creating those social and psychological conditions, first of all, for humans to act and collaborate. And without the dialogue, that is not possible. So organizing meaningful conversations that lead to action, that to me is like, that's the essence of leadership in a way. I think on top of that, I would look both inwards and outwards. From the inward looking perspective, to me, leader requires a greater level of inner stability than anyone, let's say, in his or her field. So it becomes like a pillar or a stabilization point. So leading to me today is not about telling everyone what needs to be done. It's more about showing the groundedness in the present situation that has all kinds of threats, all kinds of risks, all kinds of disruptions, but at the same time, so many opportunities. And again, the tempting opportunities. And how can you be grounded in yourself and with others, focusing on what is most important for this community, for this place to happen, and really not to deviate from that because of your fear or your excitement and so on. So that groundedness, I think, is the core. And at the same time, looking outward, I think it's the ability to sense systems in all their complexity. So that's what Marilyn talks about a lot, the need to look on the integral situation and different aspects of it and different layers and different let's say scales, and operating on all of those scales. Not just thinking, it's systemic sensing and systemic being. That's to me the other capacity of a leader. And I could go on and on. I think that I can stop with these three because there can be many more added, but I feel these are the most essential ones.
Thank you very much. Well, we're 5 minutes to go. And those, what you mentioned about having meaningful conversations which lead to collective action, such a concise definition of leadership, another one, but very, very important. And I would like to invite everyone who participates as a, how you call it, core listener, no? Keynote listener, as well as all of our keynote sort of speakers, to take those last couple of minutes to, I would even suggest 1 minute of silence, so we reflect a little bit on what have been brought up today in our conversation, maybe some feelings, sensations, memories, or ideas, insights which popped up in your mind stream. And then we'll share, but in a very concise manner. I invite participants to also share it in the chat. We'll quickly go around, and those of us who want, don't need to be everyone, of course, but maybe a few sort of words in conclusion of our small dialogue today. And I learned that dialogue is not about two people talking to each other. Dialogue is about any number of people talking to each other, the Greek word. Any final observations? And I'll start with myself because I'm the worst leader of us all. So I'll be up front on the white horse. And, you know, the phrase which came up to my mind when I was listening to all of us, there is so much learnings. And the phrase is, life is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be experienced. And the richness of our dialogue today gave me another proof of this. Maybe we will not solve all the issues, right? And all the challenges. But the richness of experience we gain as we try to address those challenges is tremendously useful and leads to some beautiful results. Let me pass it on to Marilyn. What are your conclusions from today?
One of my favorite noticings when I'm with people I really care about is simply, we were together and I forget the rest. And so when we're talking about size and scale, we can't really make any meaning of them without the togethering part of our humaning well. So I really appreciate how everyone has shared today, and I feel really inspired to really think of the natural flow of size and scale, not to use them in a mechanistic sense, but to really look into the depths of life and see what that means. Thank you.
And respecting our time, I will ask everyone, and forget me for speaking too much today. So I took your time. When we meet, please let me pay for your dinner. But maybe 1 or 2 words, and we'll complete in 3 minutes. Paddy.
This brings up the traditional concept of lechotlas, where it's a set of elders gathering together to ponder a question. And I'm left pondering. Leadership is that, to gather together to ponder a question. Thank you. It's been enriching.
Ferial, Nate, Joseph. Ferial, I think you have your mic off.
Yeah. So for me, leadership in complexity is about the word I like to speak about, Sawubona, the Zulu greeting. I see you. Can I truly see the people I am leading? Can I feel their needs, their fears, their dreams? And then the response to that is Sukona, which is I make myself available to see, to be seen. I am here. Can I show up as my whole self, not just the polished version of me? Complexity requires leaders who are in right relationship, not just with systems, but with souls. This is the work of Ubuntu in motion, navigating together because we belong to one another.
Thank you. Well, 1 minute to go. So if Nate or Joseph, you want to add anything?
Sure. I wouldn't disagree with anything that I'm hearing from my colleagues here. There's a connection, each of us is connected to each other, and you all are talking about that connection. And every one of us is leading the system. Even if it doesn't look like somebody's leading the system, they lead the system every time they make an inner shift. And so it's a dance where it's hard to see who's leading and who's following. And sometimes the most effective leaders are the people who follow well. I think Mar at the beginning of this used this phrase keynote listener, and I recognized it from our colleague Andy Ferguson, and so I set it into the space, and now I'm getting credit for it. So there's this funny irony, is it might look, somebody gives me credit, it might look like I'm leading with the phrase keynote listener, but I'm actually following. And that's this dance. And so ultimately, the most powerful and effective leadership is this ability to make shifts in ourselves in a way where we're connected with others. Because that's where we have the most leverage for moving the whole system, is through those inner shifts. And we have to stay connected. But if we can stay connected and transform ourselves, then we can transform everything.
Violeta, thank you for holding the space and having all of us in this beautiful journey together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm sure this is not the last time we sit together and explore these options. Thank you. Bye-bye all.
Cheers.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye, all of you.